Welcome everybody to the third webinar of Hands-on Agile. I'm your host, Stefan Wolpers, and today we will be talking about product backlog, anti-patterns. A bit background on myself. I've been working in the Agile industry, making software for 12 plus years now, and mainly with fast-growing venture capital funded startups in Berlin, or with large corporate organizations. At the moment, I'm working for a large electricity and gas provider here in Germany. I'm one of the stewards of the Xscale Alliance, and in my free time, I like to run webinars and write blog posts. I guess you know that. Before we start talking about the product backlog anti-patterns, I would like to make a small detour to make you familiar with my mental model, how Agile software development actually works. So from my perspective, I like to refer to it as the product creation arc. So you start on the left side with a vision that results in a strategy, then you come up with hypotheses, you run experiments to validate or falsify your hypothesis. And based on those results, you start to have a midterm planning, maybe 2 to 6 months. So something that looks like a product roadmap. Then you come to the near-term planning for the next 4, 8, maybe 12 weeks. In Scrum speak, we would refer to this as the product backlog. And then the next step would be the short-term planning. That would be a sprint backlog, for example. Then you start building the product, and at the end, you deliver the product by shipping code to resilient system at will. So that's basically my world. If you have a look at the left part of the arc, it's what I like to refer to as product discovery, and the right part of the arc is product delivery. And they meet somehow in the middle. Of course, it's not a sharp distinction between those both. However, what we can figure out here already is that any kind of product discovery is significantly more low-tech and more affordable the further to the left side you go. You don't want to run experiments on the right side, because the further you move to the right side, the more expensive the whole thing gets. This is also the reason why I believe that the product backlog, the near-term planning, is so important to actually make Agile product development work, for a very simple reason. If we talk about risk mitigation, cost of delay, opportunity cost, misallocation of resources, all this actually can be directly attributed to having the wrong kind of backlog, not getting the product backlog process right. So from my perspective, the near-term planning, the product backlog is crucial to the success of your whole team. It's the last line of defense to prevent stuff that doesn't belong there, to keep it out of the production process of actually shipping code. From my perspective, it's the make or break. Is your team supposed to become some kind of internal agency that delivers what other people want them to deliver? Or will you become the people to go to actually solve problems your customers have? And I strongly suggest that you try everything and avoid becoming a feature factory. You need to defend your product backlog with claw and tooth. It's really important from my perspective and in my experience, because otherwise, once something gets in there, the likelihood that it will be delivered is quite high. So from product backlog to sprint backlog. First, let's have a look how a product backlog / sprint planning process in practice works. At least this is my version of doing it, and I really like to coach my teams in that, and it has been working fine so far. Imagine the time axis and your current sprint. At the same time, while you're working on delivering the code of what you do considered valuable in the last sprint planning, you already start refining all the stuff that you want to work on at least in the next 2 sprints. So if you have 2-week sprints, we talk about a time frame of probably about 4 weeks. Maybe it's 6 weeks or 8 weeks, depending on how your team works, whether it's B2C or B2B, whether you ship your product in releases or whether you practice continuous deployment. You have to take the state of your product lifecycle into consideration. So a lot of individually contributing factors here. But in general, it proves to be a good thing. So what we do religiously is we have our product backlog refinement sessions once a week. We never skip them. We always go through them because it's the one moment where everyone understands why we are working on things, how we are probably doing this, and what we are going to deliver. It's critically important to have everyone from the team on the same page in this moment. So now, having this general process in mind, I like to switch gears and actually come to the anti-patterns I've been observing for years now. And it's basically always the same. Let's start with general product backlog anti-patterns. I think the most important one is what I like to refer to as prioritization by proxy. Because we all know that the product owner is the Achilles heel of the whole Scrum framework. It's this single individual that actually knows what's the best use of the team's time and resources at any given moment. It's a really challenging role, and it's also the role that is most vulnerable to any form of pressure from the organization. It's the reason that LESS, for example, large-scale Scrum, is also putting so much emphasis on the one product owner that runs the show. It's really important to preserve this role, to respect this role, and to actually provide everything the product owner needs to do his or her job. What's not working is using the product owner as some kind of proxy for a committee that is designing a product. This always ends in some kind of feature factory. This always has the bitter aftertaste of reintroducing some kind of stage gate process through the back door. The moment you take away the authority from the product owner role, the moment you start to disrespect the product owner role, you actually create a quite neat waterfall to zero process with significantly shorter feedback loops, thus also mitigating the risk of the original process. I think this is the anti-pattern number one. The product owner is actually not a product owner. Someone else is ruling into the product backlog. Next one, issues turn into artifacts. The first thing I do when I come to a new project is I have a look at the product backlog. Normally, this is some kind of software, Jira, for example, and I go through all the issues and try to understand what quality the product backlog has at that level. And you always see that the issues inside any kind of software are usually not set up in a way that you would expect it from a team that is collaboratively working on something, where the issue itself is a token for discussion. Typically, you will find that a lot of the issues, user stories, for example, are way too detailed. When I was working as a product owner, I was very strict with me in the sense that I basically defined a catchy headline. I was able to explain why this is a good thing. And I came up with 2, 3, maybe 4 acceptance criteria. And this is actually what I took into the product backlog refinement. And then the team was working on this kind of basic information and created something useful out of it in a collaborative effort. To me, it was always important that the team was in a joint effort creating the stories, because this is something completely different. If you hand over a prepared, detailed story, it's the work of someone else. It's a kind of task you impose on the team. However, if the team is collaboratively working on this, it's their user story, and this is what you want to have. So too detailed user stories are always a bad sign. Also, if there are no spikes in the whole backlog, I mean, how's that supposed to work? Do you really know everything in advance? I'm generous with spikes. Let's figure out how something works, and maybe it's not going to work at all, and we skip it. Right? But a backlog without any kind of spikes is really causing some suspicion on my side. Some people run Scrum for fixed scope projects. For example, you're replacing an existing application with a new one on a different tech stack. And always people come up with the idea, let's create all user stories up front. And I always ask myself, okay, why would you do that? I mean, do you want to have a clone of the old application, or while you're working at it, try to fix the most critical issues that you've been running into? So starting a new project with a product backlog that contains hundreds of stories that are all prepared is really not a good idea. The same applies to to backlog that is already completely estimated. Once again, estimation is a critical part of the collaborative creation process of user stories. But it's not about figuring out the future productivity of the team. It's again something that is triggering the discussion among the team members. Is everyone on the same side? Do we have an understanding what we are supposed to build and what the scope is here, right? The moment something is completely estimated, it looks to me rather mechanic. Have you really spent all the time on the estimation in a team based on estimation poker, for example? This is highly unlikely. Very often it's been a single individual that just put some numbers in there. So next one, outdated issues. I think this is self-explanatory. I mean, if we have a planning horizon of 4, 8, maybe 12 weeks in total, how can you have issues that are 6, 9, or 12 months old? I believe that old tickets are waste, simply waste. I mean, they've never been valuable enough to be put in some kind of sprint. And if that's true, why would you keep them? I always suggest to just delete everything that's older than 3 months. If it's important, it will come back. Otherwise, it's decluttering your backlog. So don't be shy, just kill this stuff. Oversized product backlog. This is closely related to the other one. I don't know how people can work with product backlog sizes of hundreds of issues. I'll lose oversight about 60 or 80 or something like that. So everything beyond 100 should raise your suspicion and should trigger some kind of research what kind of stories these actually are. If you suggest to delete all the unnecessary stuff, you typically get 2 objections. A, we cannot delete them. It's our documentation. For governance reason, compliance reason. So we deal here with loss aversion. And secondly, we put so much work into creating them. Sunk cost fallacy. Both, I believe, are serious issues that you need to talk about. However, they shouldn't prevent you from doing actually what's right. Keep your documentation outside your ticket system because it doesn't belong in there. And secondly, it's not about putting in work up front. Right? We're not getting our paycheck for putting work in. We get our paycheck for actually delivering value to customers. It's a crucial difference in my perspective. Okay, there is a question. Could we postpone the question to the end? I will come back to all of them. Thank you. So, oversized product backlog, not a good idea. Now let's switch over to our product owner. Probably you have already encountered this special type of product owner, the omniscient one. The product owner has absolutely no doubt where to go. I know what we have to build, follow me. He or she also rarely needs the team because collaboration only slows him or her down because, as you know, she or he already knows where to go. So why have all these discussions about the why and the scope and the what and etc. pp. So it's really just a bad use of that PO's time. Very commonly, he or she also not just provides the why, but also the how and what. You can observe this pattern particularly with former engineers who turned product owner, because they always believe, okay, I know what to build, right? They always have an idea how to create it themselves, which of course is not a good idea. So the combination of dominant product owner with a submissive team is really a bad combination because all the checks and balances are gone. The whole idea of having a backlog and a collaborative team approach to it is to discuss what's actually up here and where we should put our money. And this is not just the task of the product owner, it's also the task of the team to put in their knowledge and their experience and challenge the why. This is really one of the most noble tasks the team has. Why are we doing things? Why should we do things? And why should we build something in the scope that you believe is necessary? So the omniscient product owner, not a good idea. There's another form of product owner that really needs help from the team and probably also training and coaching. It's not unlikely that former business analysts turn into I would like to copy and paste product owners because they believe their job is basically to turn a former requirement documents of a few dozen or 100 pages into smaller pieces by copy pasting them into Jira. And they have a complete misunderstanding how this whole thing works. How are we creating user stories? Why it is important that it is a collaborative effort and not just one telling the other. It's really a huge task for the Scrum Master and coach to get this right. And I strongly suggest that if you're a coach or the Scrum Master, and reach out to the product owner and ask if you could help him or her. For example, always useful is even the basic training of the Wake's invest model. So independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and I think testable. So really that's an issue, and it's one of the moments where your product owner needs help from the team. So another one, the last one on the PO side, the part-time product owner. Am I in favor of minimizing the workload of the product owner? Absolutely. I always try to do so. I try to make the team work whenever possible, starting with writing user stories, but not ending there. I'm a big fan of actually having the engineers run user interviews and figuring out what the problems of the customers are. It makes communication so much easier, and it's so helpful in getting the product backlog afterwards right. However, I never ever managed to do this, even with a smaller part of the application I was responsible for, as a part-time job. It's simply not working. This is a full-time job, period. If someone believes it's a part-time job, you seriously need to talk to responsible people in the organization whether there's something completely going wrong. Okay, yours is asking a question, the role of the product manager. That's a good one. Okay, we have a few slides left and we can turn to this. So we were talking about general issues, the product owner, and of course there are team issues. The most important team issue I have encountered is product backlog that resembles a random assortment of stuff. Acceptance of criteria are missing. Probably you only have a title of a few words. No one knows what this is all about and why would this be a good idea. There hasn't happened any kind of collaboration on the ticket itself. There are tickets in there that are completely unrelated to the product role. You will find no themes, no epics. You will never find the reason why you would do something. So why are we fighting for? What's the idea that we're trying to accomplish here? And I believe this is partly due because the team either doesn't care or doesn't feel in the right position to speak up and address the issues. Both are critical points that a coach or a Scrum Master would really need to address, because this way you can stop doing Scrum altogether. You just switch to something else, or maybe go back to waterfall. It's the desire of probably being busy, but not providing value to our customers and the organization by being busy. It's outcome driven, not output, and by the way, sloppy work is expensive. So don't turn your backlog into a random assortment of stuff. It's really not working out this way. Be very, very careful what you let in there, as I mentioned earlier. Garbage in, garbage out. And no one will read the fine print if the team is not capable of delivering decent quality and value to the customers. Okay, the next one. This is overlapping a bit with sprint planning. However, it's addressing one issue that a lot of teams simply ignore. It's about where to allocate time and resources. And I'm a strong advocate that the team's time should be split. There needs to be slack time for unexpected things, for pairing, for coaching and training other team members and dealing with the unexpected. There always needs to be time, or roughly maybe 20%, to deal with bugs and technical debt. So regular refactoring. And maybe the remaining 60% can be allocated to new features and new issues, etc. IP. However, if the team is not capable of getting this straight in the sprint planning, it's usually because it has never been part of the product backlog in the first place. I'm a strong advocate of making transparent what the team has to work on, and this implies, of course, bugs as well as non-functional requirements or whatever you like to call your tech tasks. Mike asked what a spike is. A spike is basically a time box when the team decides to allocate maybe 2, 4, or 8 hours on a specific topic to figure out how things are going. For example, the team does not know the new version of the JavaScript framework would cause any trouble, so someone may just give it a try and see what's happening before they start working on this. So spikes are usually very helpful to get a better understanding about some issue, the scope of an issue, what needs to be done, whether additional training is required, etc. pp. It's a sort of research. Joshua, thanks a lot. So the last issue on the team side is refinement, the refinement process itself. There's the moment when you do not put enough time into refining user stories. As I mentioned earlier, from my perspective, it's always a collaborative effort. It's the whole team working together on getting something right. It's, of course, helpful to have a definition of ready because it's setting a standard. It's not intended to be a checklist, and by all means, but it is setting a standard and thus creating a mental model everyone applies unconsciously to creating good user stories or good issues, for example. There is the moment when you do too much of a refinement. I mean, you really don't have to break everything down to the last iota in advance. This is too much work. And there's another issue that I have observed in a team or two. There is this PO versus team game going on. I do believe that the product owner is part of the Scrum team and we're all wearing the same jersey and we all work on the same team and we want to be successful in the end. A bit of haggling is important. It's a critical part that the team, the engineers, for example, challenge the product owner. However, it needs to come to an end sooner or later because this is really getting nowhere if you create some kind of stalemate. I've seen a team using a definition of ready as some kind of stage gate process, rejecting issues that actually were okay, but because there was missing a small thing, for example, because the designs were not ready the day before the sprint was supposed to kick off. And the designer said, okay, I'm able to deliver this tomorrow. And they said, nope, definition of ready, designs have to be available. Otherwise, it's not eligible to come into the sprint. I mean, this is really not the way you should work. So this is an issue that the team sometimes have, but something that you really can work on. So good. Before we close, I'd like to briefly come to another issue about product backlog anti-patterns. What we've been talking about has been mainly in the realm of the team, dealing with each other. Some are more organizational nature. What I like to address also is the point that dealing with your stakeholders as a product owner can be really, really complicated. And I'm not just referring to the situation that you're basically stripped of your authority as a product owner. You're just a product owner by business card, but otherwise other people tell you what to do. So this is enough material to have a webinar on its own. I just like to scratch it. Whatever you do, expect flanking maneuvers by stakeholders to get their interests, their issues, their feature requests into your product backlog. So for example, we have one of my favorite, the hippoism. So the highest paid person's opinion drives the product backlog, and bypasses everything else. The hippo wants something in the backlog and the hippo will succeed. There is the brute force issue. So this is not the hippo, but someone in the organization who is very unpleasant to deal with. And typically this bullying methods might work for some time. I think that's more an issue of startups than of established organizations, because startups are more in flux cultural-wise. But this certainly is an issue. If you're dealing with a startup and you're not prepared that someone is addressing you as a product owner and tries to force things into your backlog, you probably are in the wrong organization. So have daddy fix it. Yes, escalation always works. I will tell my boss and my boss will tell your boss, and then we will see whether my issue is not that important. This is very typical. It's not just passive aggressive. It's also defying the whole idea of Scrum and what the product owner is and how the team works, etc. pp. This is a serious issue. Bribery. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. There are countless ways of doing that, and it's sometimes hard to detect. Creating tickets directly. This is the fun part. The rookie mistake, if you use Jira, for example, don't make the mistake and allow other people, particularly stakeholders, to create tickets in your backlog. You don't want to do this. Make sure that everyone from the outside has to go through your process of figuring out whether something is valuable. It's a competition of ideas. This is unpleasant to a lot of people, particularly if they're used to giving contracts to outside agencies, and those agencies will deliver what they wanted. It's a complete different model from their perspective. But never ever allow any stakeholder to create some tickets within your system, not even bug tickets. It's simply not working this way. It's a very slippery slope. Don't do that. Because the next variation of that is the dispatcher mode. Why submit to this whole product backlog process as a stakeholder in the first place? Create something and go directly to the engineer and say, okay, you're going to do that. Very not uncommon with some people from the management level, very nasty, something that needs to be immediately addressed. The last one is actually quite sympathetic to me because they're trying to hack the system while sticking to the rules. It's labeling feature requests as bugs. It's always funny. You will see there are different variations of those. For example, I was working one team where we had the idea to have a fast lane, so to speak, for small issues. We're all aware if you're working in the Scrum mode, you're really good at making the big points, the match points, but the small stuff that is also nice and valuable sometimes really gets ignored. So we created a small fast lane for the small stuff. And guess what happened? From now on, every feature request was basically downsized to the level that it would fit into the fast lane. So I really like these issues because it shows that the stakeholders are basically respecting the process, just trying to gain it. But this is a good way to start a communication and talk them out of that and maybe take them by the hand and show them how this is working in the right way. Okay, let's summarize. I believe you need to defend your product backlog at all costs. It's the make or break whether your team becomes a real team or will stay the internal agency, and whether you will become the feature factory churning out stuff that probably no one is interested in. The product backlog is, for another reason, very crucial, because if you do the product backlog refinement in the right way, it's also a very, very nice way of doing a preliminary sprint planning. So my team spent seriously no more than 15 or 20 minutes on sprint planning 1, because we actually talked about this regularly in the days before. When it comes to anti-patterns, there certainly is the missing product owner. So you have a prioritization by proxy, whatever that is, maybe a committee, maybe another manager. This is not working. Also, oversizing a product backlog is not a good idea. It's too much cognitive load, and it's always tempting to put work into stuff that actually will never be built. That's really a sign of waste. Outdated issues, just delete them. Everything that's older than 3 months certainly does not belong in a product backlog. Issues turned into artifacts, also very problematic. Everything that is moving an issue away from this idea of being a token for discussion among the team members, why they would do this and how to get it in the right way, is really critical issue, and you should immediately try to fix this. So not too detailed, certainly not 100% upfront, no matter if the scope is fixed or not of the project or product. Completely estimated, seriously, don't do that. Always stick with the usual time frame you're working on, so maybe 4, 6, 8 weeks, no longer than that. Omniscient product owner, we know what we have to do, so the product owner imposing his or her will upon the team. Critical issue, needs a lot of training, and probably then you can fix it. You need to speak up. This is certainly an issue the Scrum Master or the coach needs to address as soon as possible. Part-time PO, simple, doesn't work. What's also not working is copy-pasting large requirement documents into Jira tickets. This is not the idea. User stories and how they're being created and why we create them in the first place. Random assortment of stuff. Don't use your backlog as a repository of ideas and whatever you come across, right? This quickly leads to oversized product backlog of low value with a lot of outdated issues, and then you basically can throw it away. Make sure your product backlog reflects all the work that is necessary. I always advocate for putting non-functional requirements, technical tasks, or bugs into the product backlog so everyone can see when you do the product backlog refinement what is up and what needs to be addressed. And lastly, collaboration. as a team on creating issues, user stories, etc. pp. is a very good idea. However, don't overdo it, right? You need to find your balance how to do this. And please try to avoid using your definition of ready as a kind of stage gate to structure the communication between the engineers and the product owner. This kind of chasm is really, really not a good idea. So that needs to be overcome also, because otherwise the team will not be successful. So that's basically from my side. The next webinar will be in 2 weeks' time. Then we talk about Agile failure patterns, typical observations why Agile is not working in an organization, which I believe is sending a certain message to every one of us. You never walk alone. All your trouble is shared by a lot of other people around the world. If you want to contact me, I think you will by now know where to get me. Let's start with the Q&A. So Joris is asking, can you share your view on the role of the product manager? My current organization, he steers the POs. To me, it feels like a redundant role, only generating a larger demand for reporting and quantifying the delivery of the teams. This is a good question. I'm not sure about that. Originally, I thought the product owner can easily absorb the role of the product manager. Meanwhile, I'm not so sure about that anymore. Probably there are situations in which the coexistence between the product manager, who is probably more business and organization facing, and the product owner, who is more team facing, technology facing, is a good setup. I'm not sure that this reporting line is the best of choice, but that really depends on the context of your organization, size, age, culture, what kind of product you're offering to whom, B2B, B2C, do you have a large sales force, is this a technology company or not, is this a legacy organization that is now understanding that software is eating the world? So a lot of issues that come there into play. I wouldn't rule out that this might be a solution, but it really depends on the individual case. Multiple teams, anonymous, are working on a single product. Should we have a shared product backlog? Product wants the teams to have shared sprint backlog. Okay, I like to practice less, and one of the cornerstones of less is that we have always a shared backlog across all teams, and this is what my current teams are doing as well. However, we have split sprint backlogs. So every team has its own sprint backlog. However, we are all working jointly on the product backlog. So there's always something that we call overall product backlog refinement, where the teams or representative from the teams have a look at the complete backlog, what is up for the next weeks. And then we split into teams. So the teams pick, so to speak, the issues they like to work on. And after that, we do the refining at the team level. And this is actually working out quite nicely. So the whole team, particularly if you rotate team members, the complete team understands the scope of what is ahead. And still we have individual smaller teams who can work on the issues. And my team does product backlog refinement every sprint, typically 2 to 4 hours during a sprint. We spend time to refine the understanding. The team invariably spend last minute rush of another 2 hours each sprint. The challenge I see that the BAs from my organization play PO role too. Effectively, my onshore BA is the same person who talks to the product manager and clarifies requirements and puts more content on the user stories. I see that we are putting in all the necessary efforts to ensure estimation is more close to actuals, though it does not have to be. And the effort is to make more realizable, more predictable. Yeah, that's always the point. My question now, where are we going wrong? In spite of 2 to 4 hours of backlog refinement each sprint, we invariably spend another 2 hours most of the time. I'm not familiar with SAFe, I have to say. All I know is the huge poster of the process, and it's scaring me. So what we do, we actually keep the product backlog refinement rather short. However, the business analysts that we have are tightly integrated into the team. So there is a high level of collaboration in the team right from the beginning. And we use the product backlog refinement only to clarify issues that are relevant to the whole of the team. So we will always have, over the course of the week, breakout sessions from the business analysts with single members of the team to dive deeper into certain issues of one story, for example. But this is working, in our case, this is really working out nicely. So we spend about 1.5 hours of product backlog refinement a week. And we rarely do anything at that level and during sprint planning 1. Okay, sprint planning 2, the teams might break down the task, the issues and subtasks, etc., PP if they want to do that. But otherwise, it is a relatively straightforward thinking. However, we're sort of co-located. We're all in the same time zone, and most of us, we meet at least every 2 weeks in person for a few days. This significantly improves the way we work together. And it also helps the refinement process. So probably, in your case, I would think about trying to get a better understanding how the BAs fit better into the team and how to improve the collaboration between the BAs and the team. It maybe looks a bit like that they're separated in a way. I don't know whether that's the usual way SAFe works in that respect. Rachel, will the session be recorded and sent out afterwards? Absolutely. Yes, we have a YouTube channel. I will put up everywhere there. And okay, it needs a bit of polishing, getting out the small issues that we have here. But after that, it'll be freely available. Julia asks, some developers were not provided with detailed description, deliver something unexpected. Also claim that there are no questions when working at the issue. This eventually results in long discussions of logic, so it's faster to describe in details in the first place and then have shorter discussions. How to handle these situations. I have to say that in my current situation, I'm privileged because the engineers are looking to have this discussion in an open forum. There are no people who take issues from off the wall and then get away for 3 days and then come back and deliver something. It's also very helpful that our business analysts, as mentioned earlier, are embedded in the team, that basically we're all sitting in the same space. So whenever they have a question, they directly ask the business analyst, which is very practical. So we have a strong and ongoing collaboration between these two. So I haven't noticed that someone built something that wasn't actually intended to be built. I would suggest that you try to intensify the communication between the engineers and the business analysts. Why not locate them in the same room if you haven't yet done so? Or maybe even share a desk. You do some pairing. You can pair with a business analyst as an engineer too. It's really helpful. Okay, Vic, you mentioned, okay, you mentioned 4 to 8 weeks planning being crucial. What does this consist of, and how is involved, and who is involved? I guess, yes. Review of product backlog, going out a few sprint by stakeholders with the PO and PM periodically before the sprint planning, updating of roadmap, something else. We have an additional meeting on top of the product backlog refinement that is addressing every 2 weeks for about an hour or two the product backlog, the product roadmap. So while we use the product backlog refinement really to cover the next 2, maximum 3 sprints, we are looking ahead of that period for another 2-3 sprints in the roadmap discussions. The roadmap discussions are usually handled by the product owner, the business analysts, and the engineers who like to participate in that to get a better understanding. But it's not a mandatory ceremony. So it's if you like to participate, you're invited to join us. And this is really working out. We also dedicated a large part of our walls to the product roadmap. So it's visible at the team space. Everyone can have a look at this. Leonora, I'm about to take over a PO role run by a lead senior developer turned to PO. Thus the backlog I'm about to take over is not a list of what, but a list of how to, meaning user stories per se do not exist. Yeah. The backlog looks like a list of solutions masked under acceptance criteria. Mm-hmm. I have 4 years of PO experience and a UX background, so I do not know what kind of approach to take because I have never proposed solutions, only listed requirements to the dev teams. You're not supposed to suggest a solution. What I really, in my former PO life, what was really helpful was explaining the why. So why would something be a good idea? Why would something provide value to your customers? Add your information that you acquired before, so analytics data or interview data or whatever it is, and then ask the team how to solve this problem. It's not uncommon for former engineers to have a rather technical approach to doing things because they, in their world, they already have the solution. They just need to take some notes to remind them later. But that actually is not supposed to be the backlog. I always would say focus on the why and make it transparent that feature X would be valuable to your customers and your organizations. I would just reach out to the gentleman and ask if he could walk you through the backlog, and then I would reach out to the team and explain the situation and ask for the help. How you can slowly but steadily restructure the backlog. And I would also suggest that you consider involving them in more decisions on that level. For example, why not invite them to user tests, etc. pp. That's typically very helpful to broaden their mind. Probably they have been not so much involved before while the gentleman was still in charge. So I would really do some research on that side, and also Scrum Master to help you with running a retrospective to figure out how you could address the issue, and just really ask the team, okay, let's have a retrospective that is dealing with our backlog because it's causing me trouble. Okay, let me check. Vic, what are your thoughts on team or subgroup refinement looking ahead at future work to add questions? Yeah, absolutely fine. If that helps and everyone feels included, totally great. Simeon, as a new BPO, what are the most 3 things which I should pay attention to in order to become a successful PO? I would focus on communicating the why in a very good way and leave the how to the engineers. I would also put a lot of emphasis on including the engineers and the whole product discovery work. I've made very good experience with having engineers run user interviews. It's so much simpler because if you have this typical chain, the customer reports to the sales rep to the product owner, the business analyst then talks somehow to an engineer. You lose so much information. Just make communication direct and as short as possible. And what really helped me was the understanding that engineers are not supposed to code 100% of their time. Actually, I want them to code as little as possible to deliver the value that I want them to deliver. And it's helpful to include them as early as possible. So there are some good posts about that. I would put engineers in customer support, for example. So like Basecamp is doing it. It's really helpful. Okay, McKenna, with a limit of only 60 stories in a product backlog, that doesn't leave much room for tech debt, bug stories for mature but still evolving process. True. What is the chief criteria? Well, 60 stories, that is the level I feel comfortable with to deal with cognitive load. I understand that a mature product, maybe at the more closer to a sunset, needs a different form of attention and a different form of product backlog. Maybe even Scrum is not the right way. So I like to suggest to use Kanban for that purpose. And then you can actually have a bit larger backlog in that sense, because the issues are also smaller and they're much better defined, and there's much less uncertainty what is going on. So it's really depending on the life cycle, state of the life cycle of your product, I believe, and whether Scrum is really a good idea or not. So if you're into Scrum, if you're in an early phase of your life cycle of the product, and if you really have to make have to get the big match points, I would rather keep the product backlog really short and tight to get the best out of it. Oh, pros and cons of having one PO on more than one product. I would always suggest one product to one product owner. Two products, I mean, depends on the kind of products, on the size of the product. But if you're working at a normal company, the products really get so large so quickly that having one product owner working on two products is not a good idea. Then we come back to this part-time product owner thing. And I believe you need to focus on one application as a product owner to be really good at this. So I wouldn't recommend that. Okay. So a lot, my God, a lot of issues in the chat. The name of my YouTube channel, it's Age of Product. So the same one that you can see here. I will send out information anyway. You should receive the newsletter anyway. So I will list everything there. And yeah. Okay, it's 1852. That was a bit longer than expected. So, any more questions from your side? Mix, what about you? You put a lot of work into the chat window. I don't think I will be able to. Mix, okay. That's totally fine. Okay, anything from your side? I'm sorry it took a bit longer than expected, but I think it was a useful session. Yeah, I think that too. There's another one. So Mix, when you are porting an existing application, the argument goes that we need to record every user story there is, otherwise how we'll make sure that we don't miss something and that we have understood the full scope. What's the response here? Yeah, my last project was basically recreating an application on a new tech stack. And this was the approach that the product manager, we had a product manager at the time, also suggested. And we fortunately managed to convince him of something different, because we started to run user tests while we're working at the new application, and we were able to really straighten some things out that were really nasty in the old application. Otherwise, we would have just cloned the old one on the new tech stack, and this is a waste of time. Not necessarily a waste of time, but you would deliver under par as far the potential outcome is concerned. So while it's clear, for example, 50-60% certainly is clear what you have to build, but a lot of issues are still open. And I would suggest that you start running user interviews and get feedback as soon as possible, as soon as a new application is able to be shown to other people. So otherwise you just get a replica, a clone of the old thing. And I believe you can do much better this way. So the project I was talking about, we actually managed to deliver in time, under budget, with a better user experience at the same time. Thanks, Larry. It was a pleasure. Okay, so if there are no further questions, I would say that was a pleasant webinar. I'm looking forward to the next one. That will be in 2 weeks' time about agile failure patterns. Then we can all feel victims. No, just kidding. Just a few thoughts so that you understand what might be going wrong in your organization, and point at the issues that need solving. So thank you very much. And I hope I will be able to provide the video in about 1 or 2 weeks' time. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day.